What on earth happened at the Australian Grand Prix? I hope that we have all had an opportunity to calm down after what was probably the most insane race that I could have possibly imagined for the season opener. I just got back from the circuit now. If you don't know, I was at the AusGP. I've only mentioned it about 600 times so far on the channel, but my word, what an incredible experience that was. The atmosphere was amazing, the crowd was fantastic, the weather was less than optimal, but the weather is who we have to thank for what was an amazing race. There's so much we need to talk about, so let's get straight into it. First up, before the race even begins, Isack Hadjar out of turn 2. I was sat on the exit of turn 2. I saw him go off. I didn't see him in the barrier, but I saw I saw him go around the corner and then not come out of it, so I assumed he'd gone off. That poor lad. I feel so bad for the rookies this weekend. Behrman as well and Hadjar both having a pretty awful weekend, and the photos that we saw of Anthony Hamilton, Lewis's father, going up to Isack in the paddock and sort of consoling him was so sweet, and what a lovely man, what a nice thing for him to have done. Isack was obviously distraught with this. It looked like he'd been crying. He didn't take his helmet off, which is the driver's way of trying to block out the rest of the world. If a driver leaves their helmet on, they're feeling a bit embarrassed, and honestly, I'm not going to blame him too much. That could have happened to anyone, and it did happen to about a quarter of the grid today. So I think he needs to just completely forget about this weekend and bounce back next weekend in Shanghai. Then at the start of the race, I really thought Max was going to get both of the McLarens. I think Lando and Piastri sort of chumped together a bit to stop Max from coming through. I really thought he was going to have them. He was able to get Oscar off of the exit of turn 2. I am quite surprised that everyone got through turn 1 so well because the weather was awful. But it didn't take long for our second incident to happen with Jack Doohan on the exit of turn 5, I think it was. Again, it seemed like he just dipped a wheel onto the painted lines or maybe into the grass and just spun backwards, complete passenger. Again, another rookie error from a rookie. It's the thing we expect to see, and Kimi Antonelli came on the radio, I think, to say immediately after that he almost did the exact same thing, so this was catching a lot of drivers out. Then before we could even restart the race, Carlos Sainz has a very bizarre incident in the final corner. He seemed very confused on the radio. He said it was some torque issue. I'm assuming what this means is that when he applied pressure to the throttle, it came on a lot harder than it should have done, and that ended up just spinning his back end round and straight into the wall. And given where Alex finished this race, I really do wonder what could have been for Sainz today, because he's a fantastic driver in the wet. Williams looked to have a good strategy and it was great on its tyres today. So with Carlos and Alex in the race together, they could have had a huge haul of points for what is probably going to be a very tight midfield battle this year. That being said, James Vowles said in an interview after the race that a huge help in the strategy was actually Carlos Sainz. There's a great photo of Carlos with headphones on, I'll chuck it up there. Saying that Carlos was instrumental in telling Alex when to pit for the dry tyres and then when to go back onto the wets as well. And I think this is part of the reason why James Vowles wanted to sign Carlos Sainz, because he's just as useful outside of the car as he is when he's driving it. On the other hand, the team that Carlos has just vacated, Ferrari's strategy was Ferrari strategy times 1,000. The fact that Ferrari made Lewis Hamilton swear on the radio in his first race for them, I feel like we never ever see Lewis very animated on the radio, particularly swearing. I don't think that's really in Lewis's vocabulary much. But Lewis is really unhappy with how he was communicated to about the weather, saying that he was expecting it to be a lot more or a lot less than what they were saying, so the strategy didn't really align with what he was told, which sounds quite Ferrari-esque. Charles had a great radio message too, where he said that the car's filling up with water. I assume he means more than it usually would when it's raining, to which his engineer replied, "That will be the water." Yes, we know it's the water. I don't know. Stupid. Now, after the chaos that was the first few laps, the next sort of 35 or so laps, not much happened. Aside from Oscar finally getting past Max Verstappen on like lap 17 or so, there wasn't much in the way of overtaking, which we've come to expect from this circuit. It's not really a track where you expect to see loads of overtaking. And I think that because so many cars went out early on, the drivers were very conscious about keeping out of the wall, so I can't imagine that people were pushing as much as they would maybe normally. That was until Fernando Alonso decided to do basically a carbon copy of Jack Doohan and bin it into the wall. So another rookie mistake from one of our rookie drivers this year. After the safety car for Alonso, a lot of drivers jumped into the pits for dry tyres because the track was drying up very fast. The sun was just peeking its head through the clouds, It was still very wet and I didn't really dry off at all, but there was at least a dry line forming on the circuit, so it was time to jump to the slicks. But then came the moment that made my heart sink, along with about 150,000 locals. Coming out of turn 11, both Lando and Oscar into the gravel. Lando managed to keep it together in the final corner, but I think Oscar came back on the track with too much momentum, and if you look at his onboard, as soon as he comes out the gravel, he basically spins immediately. I'm guessing his tyres just had absolutely no grip. And around he went back onto the grass. The collective sigh from the crowd. It was heartbreaking. I feel so bad for Oscar. What I'm thinking happened was that he came around the final corner, saw Lando off in the gravel. That must have just thrown his concentration for a second, missed his braking point and did the exact same thing as Lando. Max, very opportunistic, obviously picked up a position there and that was just behind Lando. Thankfully, Oscar was able to continue. The crowd gave a massive cheer when he got out of the grass, which was lovely to see. And Oscar did fight hard to get back to P9. The move he pulled on Hamilton, I don't know if this move was shown on the broadcast, but I heard the commentators talking about it about 5 minutes after the race had finished, and I hadn't seen it, so I had to look it up on Instagram when we got home. That move on the turn 9-10 chicane up against Lewis Hamilton was incredible. I was hoping that Oscar was coming into this year with a bit more aggression because he's now got a championship winning car. He needs to make everything count, and if he's pulling moves like that against Lewis Hamilton, I definitely think he's got what it takes to be fighting at the front this year. If he can iron out these mistakes. It's tough to be too critical on him when so many other cars went out. I mean, Fernando Alonso's great in the wet and he binned it. Liam Lawson also went off that we've not spoken about yet. Gabriel Bortoleto went off that we've not spoken about. Kimi Antonelli had a very nice spin on his way to a fantastic P4 finish. Leclerc also had a spin. Max had a couple of moments where his back end was stepping out, and Max did have that mistake where he just dipped into the gravel that let Oscar pass into P2. So honestly, no one out there today had a particularly clean race, so it's difficult to put too much fault in these drivers. But the crashes we've not spoken about now, as I said, Liam Lawson, again, it just seemed like he dipped onto the white lines and around he went. The same for Bortoleto. I think he dipped a wheel into the grass and lost all grip and again straight into the wall. It's a shame because Bortoleto is a driver that I rate very highly, and I think he was having a fantastic weekend up until that point. After Bortoleto and Lawson's car had been cleaned up, there was 10 laps till the end, and my heart was pounding. It was quite difficult to follow a lot of what was happening, as is quite often the case when you go to an event. But I honestly had no idea who was going to finish where. At one point I looked up and it was a Ferrari 1-2, and then Tsunoda was P3, and then Gasly was P3, and then Max was leading, and then Lando was leading. With about 5 or 6 laps to go, I genuinely had no idea who was going to finish that race in P1. But Lando was able to deliver today for McLaren, which I think is great to see. Max Verstappen was obviously very close behind, and Max could have so easily won this race. So it looks like we're going to have a championship battle on our hands, which is so good to see. I'm hoping that Piastri will be up there fighting for McLaren too, and that Lawson can do it for Red Bull, and the Ferrari boys too. If today's anything to go by, or this weekend in fact, there's not going to be much hope for Ferrari this year. But Mercedes, I think, have surprised a few people. They've certainly surprised me. I didn't expect them to be getting a P3 and a P4. So for Kimi to come from 16th on the grid to a P4 finish in a race that saw so many drivers fall out. Antonelli said himself when he was interviewed pre-race that he loves these conditions, so we could have another wet weather master on the grid. George is pretty good in the wet too. We've seen that with him before, particularly in the Williams days, getting that P3 in quali in Sochi, the P2 in Spa 21. And this makes Kimi as well the second youngest ever points scorer, just behind Max Verstappen. So I cannot wait to see more of this kid. I really rate Antonelli. Let's hope he can keep on delivering for Mercedes. And what about that P5 finish for Alex Albon? I'm such a huge fan of Alex. I'm so happy that he was able to get that finish. I really think that Williams are going to be... They could even be best of the rest this year, just behind the sort of Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes. I mean, at the moment, Williams are actually 4th in the constructors. They're ahead of Aston Martin, Sauber, Ferrari, Alpine, Racing Bulls and Haas. And I'm sure that if they could keep that P4, James Vowles would be a very happy man. But I do think realistically that if Williams can get P5 in the constructors, that would be a massive achievement for a team that's been backmarkers for such a long time. I don't know if anyone watched Lance Stroll's onboard for the entirety of that race, but I forgot that Lance even existed. And then across the line he was P6, and I have no idea how and when that happened. I also have no idea what happened to Yuki Tsunoda, because he was like 5th the whole race, and then I looked up at the timing board and he was P2 or P3 or something. And then he was nowhere to be seen. I've got no idea what happened to Yuki. If anyone knows, let me know. I can't seem to find out what happened to Yuki or where on earth Lance Stroll delivered a P6 from. Shout out to Lance. Also shout out to whoever gave me this lovely Lance Stroll bracelet. Walking out of the gates, some girl had a bunch of them and was giving them out, so thank you for that bracelet. And shout out to Nico Hülkenberg as well with that P7 finish. Sauber have now scored more points this year than they did last year, which is insane out of a 24 race calendar. 6 points for Nico Hülkenberg this year, only 4 last year for the team. Now let's move on to predictions. This is my rival comment for the week. If you want to be featured in next week's predictions video, let me know in my Chinese predictions video on Thursday or Friday who you think your winner, binner, pole position and top 3 are going to be. So for pole position, I went for Lando Norris, who of course did get pole position. Unfortunately, this commenter didn't leave a pole position, but they did predict Charles to win, so I'm going to assume that you thought Charles would get pole because that means that I get a point and you don't. For winner and binner, I chose Isaac Hadjar to be my winner. And it was looking so good, wasn't it? He qualified P11, just missed out on Q3, the highest placed rookie in qualifying. And then the race start happened and he binned it in the wall in turn 2. So I don't think I can really claim that Isaac had a good weekend. So I don't get a point there, unfortunately. And you chose Charles Leclerc as your winner. I don't think we can really say that Charles had a winning weekend, can we? I think Ferrari bottled it for both their drivers this week. For my top 3, I had Charles in P3, no. I had Lando in P2, no. And I had Oscar Piastri to win the race. Did Oscar Piastri win the AusGP? No, he didn't. And you went for George in P3. What a shout that was. I was not expecting George in P3. Piastri in P2, nope. And Leclerc to win the race. Certainly not. So that's 1 point for me and 1 point for the fans. I feel like I can't call you guys fans. That seems so weird. So that's 1 point for me and 1 point for you guys. Again, don't forget to comment your predictions on next week's video. So there we have it. That is what on earth happened at the AusGP 2025. I've had the best day ever. I was so lucky to be able to go to the race. Even though I got absolutely drenched today and baked in the sun all day Saturday, Friday and Thursday, I could not be happier. If there's anything I missed in this video, do let me know down in the comments. There's probably about a million things I've not covered because my brain is going too fast at the moment. I also have been documenting a sort of vlog of the AusGP to do a bit of a review of my experience. So that'll be coming out probably in about a week or so. But yeah, for you guys watching back home in the UK, I hope you've had plenty of coffee this morning and good luck staying up the rest of the day. I always used to just go back to bed after the race is finished. Thank you guys so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.